The thermometer read -18 when Sarah Chin first noticed the structure. Not the cold. Every rancher in northern Minnesota expected January to bite. But the thing itself, sitting like a pale dome in the back 40 acres of the property she'd inherited 3 months ago from her uncle. She'd driven past that spot 100 times since moving to the ranch. The snow had been light in November, heavier in December. Now, in mid-January, with 3 feet on the ground and more coming, the dome had emerged. Not been built. Emerged. As if the snow had peeled back to reveal something that had been waiting underneath all along. Sarah pulled her truck closer. The structure stood maybe 12 feet tall, 30 feet across. Smooth curves, no sharp edges. The surface had a strange quality in the flat winter light. Not quite white, not quite translucent. She killed the engine and stepped out, her breath crystallizing instantly. Hay. The dome was made of hay. Compressed, formed, shaped into something that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie, not a cattle ranch in Roseau County. She walked around it slowly, her boots crunching through the crusted snow. The construction was seamless, the bales woven together in a pattern she couldn't quite follow. No gaps. No loose ends. No way this happened by accident. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tom Erickson, the ranch foreman who'd worked for her uncle for 20 years and stayed on after his death. "You find the igloo yet?" She called him. "You know about this? Your uncle built it. 3 of them, actually. That's the smallest." "When?" "Last winter." Said he was experimenting. Sarah pressed her gloved hand against the hay. "Solid. Dense. Experimenting with what?" "Told me I'd understand when I needed to." Tom's voice carried that practical certainty of someone who'd stopped asking why years ago. "Storm's coming in tomorrow. Real one. You might want to move the heifers to that pasture." She looked at the sky. Clear blue, painfully bright. "Weather says light snow." "Weather's wrong. Your uncle taught me to read the signs. Trust me on this." Tom had been right about every weather call since she'd arrived. Sarah spent the afternoon moving cattle, watching the heifers eye the dome with what she could only describe as recognition. They'd been here last winter. They knew. By evening, the wind had shifted. By midnight, it was howling. By morning, northern Minnesota had disappeared under what the news would later call a historic blizzard. Visibility 0. Temperature, -35 before wind chill. The kind of storm that killed exposed cattle in hours. Sarah couldn't see the back 40 from the house. Couldn't see 20 feet in any direction. The world had become nothing but white noise and white static, and the particular terror of knowing you had living things depending on you, and no way to reach them. The power went out at 7 a.m. The phone lines followed at 9. The snow didn't stop for 48 hours. When it finally cleared, Sarah fought her way to the back pasture, expecting the worst. Found instead every single heifer alive, packed inside and around the hay dome like they'd planned it. The structure had held. More than held, it had trapped heat, blocked wind, and somehow kept 30 head of cattle from freezing. Tom met her there, his face showing the kind of not surprise that meant he'd expected exactly this. "Your uncle knew. Built 3 of these strategically placed around the ranch. Said modern cattle barns work fine until they don't. Said sometimes old solutions work better than new ones." But how did he know? The cattle know. They remembered from last year. Headed straight here when the storm hit. Tom walked around the dome, checking the structure. "Your uncle spent 2 years figuring this out. Talked to some researchers. Scandinavian design, apparently. Vikings used something similar. Dense hay holds heat, blocks wind, breathes just enough to prevent moisture buildup. And it's food. If they get desperate, they can eat their way out." Sarah stared at the dome. At the cattle. At the evidence of her uncle's foresight. He never mentioned this. He mentioned a lot of things in the last year. After his diagnosis. Tom's voice went quiet. Said you'd need to understand the ranch on your own terms. Said the best teaching is setting things up so people discover the answers themselves. 3 days later, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a Texas number. "Ms. Chin, this is Marcus Webb, Director of Cattle Operations for Northland Agricultural Investments. We've been following your situation with interest." Sarah said nothing. She'd learned in her previous life as an engineer that silence made people talk. "We understand you lost 0 cattle in the recent weather event. That's remarkable. Most operations in the region lost 10 to 15%. Some higher." Webb's voice carried the smooth confidence of corporate power. "We'd like to discuss your methods. Potentially license your technology." "My uncle's technology?" "Of course. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for the ranch. 7 figures. You'd be free to return to your engineering career. We'd preserve your uncle's innovations. Everyone wins. The ranch isn't for sale. A pause. Ms. Chun, I don't think you understand the costs involved in running a successful cattle operation. The margins are razor thin. You're facing equipment upgrades, fence repairs, feed costs. I'm aware of the costs. We've been acquiring properties in the region, building a more efficient, consolidated operation. Your ranch sits right in the middle of our holdings. It would be beneficial for you to consider our offer seriously. Something in his tone triggered her engineering instincts. The ones that said, when someone tells you what's beneficial for you, they're usually telling you what's beneficial for them. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. The offer has an expiration date. She hung up and called Tom. Northland Agricultural Investments. You know them? His answer came too fast, too careful. Some. Tom. They've been buying up ranches. Not always friendly. The Johnsons sold last year, took a loss. The Petersons are fighting a lawsuit over water rights. Your uncle, he had concerns. What kind of concerns? The kind he kept in the office safe. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you saw the files. Tom cleared his throat. Didn't want to dump it on you too early. You had enough to deal with. The files told a story her uncle had pieced together over 2 years. Northland wasn't just buying ranches. They were creating conditions that forced sales. Broken fences blamed on the owner. Water contamination traced to improper management. Equipment failures that looked like neglect. Insurance claims denied on technicalities. A pattern of pressure, always just legal enough to avoid prosecution, always pointing toward the same solution. Sell to Northland, escape the problems. But the pattern broke at her uncle's property. Every pressure campaign had failed. Because her uncle had documented everything. Dates, times, suspicious vehicle sightings, conversations, patterns. And he'd built redundancy into every system. The hay domes were just one example. He'd installed trail cameras disguised as bird houses. Maintained paper backups of every digital record. Created a web of preparation that assumed someone was trying to harm his operation and planned accordingly. The first drone appeared 3 days later. Small, commercial grade, flying a grid pattern over her property at dawn. Sarah tracked it from her bedroom window, watched it map the ranch with systematic precision. It returned the next morning. And the next. She mentioned it to Tom. He nodded slowly. It's starting. What's starting? The pressure campaign. They want the ranch. Your uncle's innovations, the location something. They're going to make you want to sell. I'm not selling. They're counting on that changing. The fence break happened on a Tuesday. Sarah found it during morning rounds. A clean cut in the wire, cattle drifting toward the highway. Not weathered. Not rusted. Cut. She repaired it, photographed everything, and found Tom's trail camera pointed directly at the spot. Checked the footage. A truck at 3 a.m. 2 men in unmarked coveralls. Wire cutters catching moonlight. Clear faces, clear license plate, clear intent. They'd driven onto her property, cut her fence, and left. Banking on her not having evidence, on the sheriff writing it off as wear and tear, on insurance declaring it owner negligence. They hadn't counted on her uncle's paranoia being justified. Hadn't counted on his heir being an engineer with a gift for systems analysis. Sarah made copies. Called the sheriff. Filed a report. The deputy was sympathetic but practical. Without knowing who they work for, we can't do much. The truck's a rental, paid cash. Could be anyone. They flew a drone over my property for 3 days before this. Drones are legal, ma'am. And fence breaks, they happen. I'm not saying you're wrong, but proving conspiracy is hard. Sarah spent that night going through her uncle's files again. Found a name buried in his notes. Ellen Vasquez, attorney, Minneapolis. Specialized in agricultural law. Her uncle had consulted her twice in the last year of his life. Vasquez answered on the second ring. Listened to Sarah's summary without interrupting. Then, your uncle warned me this might happen. How serious are you about fighting? Completely. Good. Because they're going to escalate. They always do. The question is whether you're prepared to document everything, trust no one, and possibly lose before you win. My uncle was. Your uncle was dying. Made him fearless. You're alive. Makes you vulnerable. Vasquez's voice softened slightly. But it also means you can finish what he started. Are you in? I'm in. The equipment failures began within a week. Tractor battery dead. cables corroded in a pattern Sarah recognized from deliberate tampering. Feed contamination that took out 3 head before she caught it. Water system malfunction that would have frozen the lines if Tom hadn't noticed. Each incident carefully calibrated to create cost, create doubt, create the impression of an owner overwhelmed by problems they couldn't solve. Sarah documented everything, photographed everything, sent copies to Vasquez, and started her own surveillance system, installing cameras her uncle hadn't placed, creating redundant systems for the redundant systems. The second call from Webb came on a Sunday. Ms. Chun, I hear you've been having difficulties. How would you hear that? Small community. Word travels. Our offer still stands. Though given the complications you've experienced, we'd need to adjust the price somewhat. The ranch isn't for sale. Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Or the right pressure. His tone shifted, the professional mask slipping. You're a smart woman. Engineer, right? You understand systems. Systems fail. Ranches fail. Sometimes fighting is more expensive than surrendering. Is that a threat? It's an observation. Talk to the Petersons. Talk to the Johnsons. They fought. They lost. They wish they'd sold earlier, before the legal fees, before the stress, before the losses mounted. Webb paused. You have 72 hours to reconsider. After that, our offer drops 30%. Sarah hung up and called Vasquez. They're threatening me. Record it next time. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're part of without telling them. Vasquez sounded energized. They're getting sloppy. Means they're on a timeline. Something's pushing them. Tom had the answer. Found it in property records from the county assessor's office. Northland had been assembling a corridor. Her ranch sat dead center of a planned access route. They needed her property to connect their holdings, to make their investment work. Without it, they had expensive land locked by poor access and hostile neighbors. They're trapped by your uncle's stubbornness, Tom said. And now by yours. Must be making their investors nervous. The blizzard returned in early February, smaller than the first but still vicious. Sarah moved the cattle to the hay domes. All 3 this time, using her uncle's strategy of dispersed shelter. The storm hit hard, lasted 30 hours, cleared to reveal every animal safe. And revealed something else. Tracks in the fresh snow. Vehicles that had driven onto her property during the storm, during the whiteout when visibility was 0 and normal precautions didn't matter. They'd headed straight for the hay domes. For different sets of tire tracks, all converging on the structures. Sarah followed them. Found boot prints around each dome. Found holes drilled into the hay, deep probes that had pierced the structures. Found equipment marks where something heavy had been set up and taken down. All during a blizzard, all while she was trapped at the house, all assuming no one would check because no one would be crazy enough to go out in that weather. Tom stared at the evidence. They were testing something, measuring something. The structural integrity, Sarah said slowly. They wanted to know if these work, if my uncle's design actually functions. She pulled out her phone, started photographing everything. They're not just trying to buy the ranch. They're trying to steal the technology. Can they do that? If they can prove it's unpatentable traditional knowledge? Maybe. If they can claim they developed it independently? Possibly. Sarah's engineering mind kicked into high gear. But they need proof of concept. They need data. They can't just copy hay domes without understanding why they work. So they're stealing the research. Vasquez nearly shouted when Sarah called. That's trespassing during a natural disaster. That's industrial espionage. That's enough for a restraining order at minimum. Get me everything. Every photo, every video, every piece of evidence. The drone swarm came 3 days later. Not 1 drone. 6. Flying in formation, mapping her property in high resolution, using what looked like LiDAR to create 3D models of the structures. Sarah watched from the house, filmed them with her own cameras, and waited. They returned that night. Thermal imaging, scanning the domes while cattle were inside, measuring heat signatures and insulation values. Sarah had Tom's trail cameras running, had her own security system active, caught everything in 4K detail, and caught the truck that dropped off the drones, caught the Northland Agricultural Investments logo on the door in one clear frame before someone realized their mistake and backed into shadow. Vasquez filed for the restraining order Monday morning. Northland's attorneys responded by Wednesday. The hearing was set for Friday. Sarah drove to Minneapolis, met Vasquez for the first time in person, and walked into a courtroom expecting corporate lawyers and legal maneuvering. Found instead Marcus Webb himself, sitting behind the defense table, watching her with cold assessment. The hearing lasted 2 hours. Sarah presented evidence. Vasquez argued law. Northland's attorneys claimed coincidence, denied knowledge, suggested that ranch operations often look similar from aerial views. The judge listened, made notes, and granted a temporary restraining order pending further investigation. Webb caught Sarah in the parking lot afterward. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're trespassing on my property. You're conducting industrial espionage. You're running a systematic harassment campaign. I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be. Your uncle was smarter than this. He knew when to negotiate. My uncle documented everything you did to him. Every visit, every call, every pressure point. He just didn't live long enough to use it." Sarah met his eyes. "I did." Something flickered in Webb's expression. "Calculation. Reassessment. How much? How much what? To sell. Name your price. The ranch isn't for sale, but I'll license the hay dome technology to you for fair market rate. You can use it on your properties. You can even claim you pioneered it in the U.S. market. But you leave my ranch alone." Webb laughed. Actually laughed. "You think we want your little craft project? We want the land, the location, the access. The technology is worthless without scale. Then you have a problem, because you're not getting the land. Everyone breaks eventually, Ms. Chin. Everyone has a price or a pressure point. We'll find yours." The visit from the Department of Agriculture came the following week. Routine inspection, they said. Just checking compliance with environmental regulations. Sarah let them in, walked them through the operation, and watched them focus intensely on the hay domes. "These structures aren't in the farm plan we have on file," the inspector said. Younger guy, nervous, reading from a tablet. "Any changes to agricultural structures need to be pre-approved for environmental impact. They're hay, compressed and shaped, but just hay. They're temporary winter shelters. The regulations don't distinguish between temporary and permanent if the structure affects water runoff or wildlife patterns. You could be looking at violations, fines, potentially remediation requirements." Tom appeared at Sarah's shoulder. "Those regulations changed 6 months ago. When these were built, they were fully compliant. Grandfather clause applies." The inspector checked his tablet, frowned. "I'll need to verify that." "You do that," Tom said evenly. "And while you're at it, check who requested this inspection. Because routine visits don't happen in February. Someone made a call." The inspector left without issuing citations. Sarah found Tom in the barn afterward. "Grandfather clause? Your uncle tracked every regulation change, documented exactly when he built each structure, made sure everything was legal at the time. He knew they'd try this." Tom pulled a file folder from a locked cabinet. He was always 3 steps ahead. The file contained correspondence with state officials, photos time-stamped and geotagged, permits obtained proactively. Her uncle hadn't just built hay domes. He'd built an legal fortress around his right to build hay domes. Sarah called Vasquez. "They're using the state to pressure me. Document the timing. Document who requested the inspection. If we can prove Northland influenced a regulatory action, that's serious." Vasquez paused. "But Sarah, you need to understand something. They have resources. They have time. They can make your life hell for years. Your uncle started this fight knowing he wouldn't finish it. Can you? My uncle left me a ranch, a profitable operation, a legacy. Why would I walk away? Because fighting is expensive. Because isolation is hard. Because winning takes longer than you think." Vasquez's voice gentled. "I've seen this before. The question isn't whether you're tough enough. It's whether you're stubborn enough." Sarah looked out at the ranch, at the hay domes standing like fortresses against the wind, at the cattle surviving conditions that would have killed them in conventional barns, at the evidence of her uncle's foresight and preparation. "My uncle was stubborn enough to prepare for a fight he knew he couldn't finish. I think I can be stubborn enough to finish what he started." The community meeting happened in late February. Northland hosted it at the county building, billed as an agricultural futures forum. Sarah attended with Tom, sat in the back, and watched Webb present a vision of consolidated farming, improved efficiency, better resource management. He talked about struggling family farms, about the need for institutional support, about how Northland could provide stability. He made it sound generous, made it sound inevitable, made it sound like family ranchers were doomed without corporate intervention. Then he showed a map. The proposed Northland Corridor. Properties they'd acquired, properties they were negotiating for, properties they planned to consolidate. Her uncle's ranch appeared as a small white space in the center of the display. A hole in their perfect plan. Some owners are reluctant to participate, Webb said smoothly. They don't understand the benefits of consolidation. They cling to outdated methods and refuse to adapt. But eventually, economics forces the issue. Change is coming whether they're ready or not. Sarah stood up. Tell them about the fences. The room went quiet. Webb's smile didn't change. I'm sorry. Tell them about the systematic fence cutting, the equipment sabotage, the regulatory pressure. Tell them about how you create the conditions that force sales. Sarah pulled out her phone, projected images onto the wall using the room's display system. Fence breaks, tampered equipment, drone footage. Tell them about how you make change happen. The murmur started small and built. Other ranchers recognizing their own experiences. The Petersons standing up, confirming similar incidents. The Johnson's son pointing out equipment failures that had bankrupted his parents. A pattern emerging from individual complaints, a conspiracy that had hidden in plain sight by looking like random misfortune. Webb tried to regain control. These are serious allegations without evidence. I have video of your contractors cutting my fence. I have drone footage of your team trespassing during a blizzard. I have recordings of you threatening me. Sarah let that sink in. My uncle documented years of harassment. He just didn't live long enough to expose it. I'm finishing what he started. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Ranchers surrounding Sarah, sharing their own stories, their own suspicions. The sheriff's deputy present at the meeting looked increasingly concerned, making notes, requesting copies of evidence. Webb left through a side door, his professional mask finally cracking to show fury underneath. Tom leaned close to Sarah. Your uncle would be proud. He always said the truth works best when it's shared. The FBI arrived in March. Not local law enforcement. Federal agents investigating a multi-state pattern of agricultural fraud and conspiracy. Turned out the Petersons had filed complaints. The Johnsons had gathered evidence. And now Sarah's documentation tied everything together into a pattern that crossed state lines and triggered federal jurisdiction. Agent Morrison was matter-of-fact and thorough. We've been watching Northland for 18 months. Your uncle's files gave us the Minnesota connection we needed. Your evidence proves ongoing criminal enterprise. We'd like your cooperation as we build the case. Sarah spent 3 days with federal investigators, walking them through everything. The drones, the trespassing, the equipment tampering, the regulatory manipulation, the systematic pressure campaign. They seized computers from Northland's regional office, interviewed employees, traced the rental trucks and the drone operators, and they found something Sarah hadn't known. Her uncle hadn't just documented harassment. He'd infiltrated Northland's communications, used his engineering contacts to access their planning documents, discovered that the hay domes were only part of what they wanted. The land itself sat on top of a geological formation that made it perfect for a massive feedlot operation. Northland wasn't buying ranches to help farmers. They were assembling a vertically integrated agricultural empire, and her property was the linchpin. Your uncle figured it out, Morrison said. Spent the last year of his life gathering evidence. He was going to go public, but died before he could. Left everything to you instead. Left the fight to you. Sarah felt the weight of that legacy. The burden of inherited warfare. Did he know that he was leaving this to me? His last email to our field office said, "My niece is smarter than I ever was. She'll finish this right." Morrison closed the file. He trusted you to fight. Was he right? Sarah thought about the hay domes, about engineering solutions to complex problems, about building systems that survived pressure. He was right. The trial happened in September. Federal court, multiple defendants, charges ranging from trespassing to conspiracy to commit fraud. Sarah testified for 6 hours, walking the jury through evidence her uncle had gathered and evidence she'd added. Other ranchers testified. The Petersons, the Johnsons, 5 other families from Minnesota, and 3 from neighboring states. A pattern of exploitation stretching across the northern plains. Webb's defense argued aggressive business tactics weren't criminal. Claimed the fence breaks and equipment failures were coincidental. Suggested the drone flights were routine aerial surveys. But the video evidence was damning. The documented communications showed intent. The systematic pattern proved conspiracy. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Found Webb and 3 other Northland executives guilty on 11 counts. recommended the company be broken up and assets sold to compensate victims. Sarah stood outside the courthouse afterward, Tom beside her, watching news crews scramble for statements. Her phone buzzed with interview requests, offers from agricultural magazines, interest from technology companies wanting to license the Hay Dome design. "Your uncle would have hated the attention," Tom said. "My uncle documented everything specifically so it would get attention. He just didn't want to be around for it." Sarah pocketed her phone. Time to go home. The ranch thrived. News coverage brought customers for her cattle, investors interested in her methods, researchers wanting to study the Hay Dome technology. Sarah licensed the design openly, refusing to patent what her uncle had built from traditional knowledge. Kept the ranch, expanded the operation, hired 3 more workers. The Hay Domes became a model for cold-weather livestock management. Universities studied them. Other ranchers built them. Insurance companies started giving discounts for properties that used them because the loss ratios were so much better than conventional barns. And every winter, when the temperature dropped and the blizzards came, Sarah watched her cattle shelter in the domes and thought about her uncle. About the gift he'd left her. Not just property, not just knowledge, but a fight worth finishing and the tools to win it. Tom found her in the barn one January morning, anniversary of her first winter on the ranch. "Your uncle used to stand in this exact spot. Watch the domes," he'd say. "Sometimes the best way to fight the future is to make sure the past survives to meet it." Sarah looked at the structures standing strong against the wind. Looked at the cattle thriving. Looked at the ranch that had survived corporate predation and emerged stronger. "He made sure it survived. He made sure I knew how to protect it. He made sure you knew how to fight. The protection was up to you." Tom smiled. "You did good. Better than good. You finished what he started and built something new on top." The ranch became a teaching operation. Sarah hosted workshops, shared her uncle's techniques, opened the property to researchers. The Hay Domes were just one innovation among many, but they'd become a symbol. A symbol of resisting consolidation, of preserving family operations, of fighting corporate exploitation with evidence and persistence and stubborn refusal to quit. And every time Sarah drove past the domes, every time she checked on the cattle sheltered inside them, she heard her uncle's voice in her memory. "The best teaching is setting things up so people discover the answers themselves." He'd set everything up. The evidence, the structures, the fight. And Sarah had discovered not just the answers, but her own capacity to finish what he'd started. The ranch endured. The domes stood strong. And the cattle survived every winter, sheltered by innovation and legacy, and the kind of foresight that planned for battles beyond one person's lifetime. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and innovation in the face of corporate pressure, I'd love for you to check out another tale from the channel. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really helps us continue bringing these stories to you. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, super chats are always appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.